We are working on the laptop store project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. We saw previously how we could make a selection for the user's choice in the case where the user did not specify any preference. Basically, in this case, the query string is an empty string. And what it means is that all the laptops need to be selected and would move to this list called selected laptops, let's say. In this case, in this video, we are going to go further and look at the other two scenarios, which are actually quite similar to each other. We'll first start with the case where the user has a simple preference, which means the user has specified just one metric. Could be speed, could be brand, could be screen size, whatever. We'll see that the same exact logic, in fact, will get applied to a more complex preference. Let's start with a simple example. Let's say the user has given only one preference, and that preference happens to be speed. Now, think about it. The way I could do this piece of code, let's say speed alone, is that I can say, look, selected is an empty list, or say selected laptops is an empty list. I am going to go through this laptops list, every laptop in that list, which is basically saying that I'm going to pick up every laptop, which is a dictionary. And I'm going to say that, okay, look, if laptop speed is, let's say, equal to 3.55 gigahertz, of course, it has to be double equal to here, then I will choose this laptop. Think about it. This laptop, this for loop runs over every laptop. All the laptops that have a speed which is 3.15 will get selected. Now, this approach will work. But the problem here is that this is quite rigid because, the user's chip preference may be speed, maybe, let's say, brand, maybe, let's say, RAM and so on. However, remember that in fact, we have already captured the user's preference inside this query. In this case, if the user's preference was just that speed, our query would have been laptop speed. There's a typo here. There should have been 2 equal to's. But nonetheless, you get the idea that our query would have been laptop speed is, say, double equal to 3.15 gigahertz. Now, this is quite powerful because remember, once this speed, once this, let's say, user's preference has been put inside this query, which is a string, I can use the eval command to, in fact, communicate to do this. I will do it something like this, that I'll say, look, selected is, say, empty list for laptop in laptops list. If eval query, well, then that laptop is, let's say, to be selected. We'll first see this working, and then we'll just extend this argument just a little bit to say that, okay, look, the same exact thing can be done in a much more concise manner using what is called list comprehension. In fact, you'll see that this entire 3 statements, let's say, in the for loop will become a single statement. But the idea is really coming from here. First, let's get clear with just this. So I come into my code over here. Now, clearly, this is a situation where my query is not empty. So I just go and say, put, let's say, an else over here, because this is where, say, a user has, indicated say, preferences. Now, like I said, selected laptops will start with an empty list, but I could, let's write to the long form first. So I just go and say, well, for, let's say, laptop, in, let's say, laptops, say, laptop and say laptops list. I'll go through every laptop in that laptop list. I will just ask myself a question. Well, if eval, let's say, query is true, which is just, I could put this like it's true, but I can also just leave it, just this much, because if this condition is true, remember, if the condition, then this gate opens up. So if eval query, which means if this returns a true, well, go and append this laptop to the selected laptops. So I just go and say selected laptops dot append, let's say, laptop. Now we will first see this working because that makes it a lot more clearer. Right? So let's say I indicate a preference that I want a laptop from, let's say, WDell. Now for everything else, I keep putting a none because that's not the preference for me. When I do this, now let's look at the query first. So query is laptop brand is equal to, let's say, WDell. Of course, we've got a double equal to here. Now keep in mind, laptop, it runs through this, this variable, let's say in the for loop is running over laptops list. Let's just try for ourselves. Let's say my laptop is, say laptop is, say laptops, list say 0, that happens to be, say for example, it is brand WSS. If I were to run, let's say, so if I were to, let's say, run eval say query, that returns me a false, and that's because notice for this laptop the brand is not. Yes, so look at this. Now on the other hand, let's say if I had laptop chosen as laptop list 1, I'll just find out that this is Dell. Now for this laptop, if I were to run eval, let's say query, that will return me a true. Now remember, eval statement, we have seen this before, takes in a valid Python statement as a string and evaluates that. In this case, we have quite smartly named this variable laptop, and that's what we are using inside the for loop. So basically, by doing this, if I look at my selected, let's say, laptops right now, you will notice that all of them have a brand of, say, WDell. In fact, we can see how many have been selected. So, let's say select, sorry, this is to be selected laptops. That is 7. So it turned out that 7 laptops met this criteria of brand being WDell. And you can see that they've all got, so brand is WDell here, brand is WDell here, brand is say WDell here. So they are all, let's say, correctly selected. Now, this particular statement, remember previously we used, let's say, list comprehension to sort of condense this statement down, to condense this for loop over here down to, let's say, this concise statement over here. In fact, we can do the same exact thing. I can write this, once you've understood how this for loop works, I can write this in a much more concise manner. I can just go and say, well, selected laptops is, laptop for laptop in laptops list if eval query. Now, we have actually seen this before. For those of you who tried bonus ideas, for example, in the the number run project, we in fact use list comprehension to create some special lists over there. But this, this statement here is in fact exactly the same as this for loop over here. Now we can understand list comprehension a bit better by looking at a certain example, just to sort of illustrate the point here. Let's say I want to create a list of numbers going from 0 to say 100. One of the ways I could do this is to say that, look, I create a list called, let's say, X, which is empty list. Then I just go and say for A in range, for instance, say 101. I just go and say, well, look, X dot append, say A. Now, if I do this, notice my X has become a list from 0 to 100. And that's not a surprise because this for loop ran and every value of A, in fact, got appended to the list. But turns out that there is a faster way of doing this. There's a more, let's say, concise way of doing it. For that purpose, let me first, clear X. So X now is empty. I can just go and say, well, X is equal to, say, A for A in range, let's say 101. Now, instead of writing the for loop explicitly, I can do this. In fact, my X is exactly the same as earlier, right? That's kind of like what we had done earlier here. Selected laptops is laptop for laptop in, say, laptops list. Now, in this case, it's coming from the range. It could also come from a list. So basically, every value of that list or this range got populated. Now, let's say I want only the even number. So I just go and say, well, X is equal to A for A in range 101. Say if, for example, A modulo 2 is equal to 0. Now, if I were to do this, notice I have ended up only with the even numbers. Now, that's kind of what is going on over here. I'm saying that, okay, look, pick up all the laptops from this list if this query comes correct for that particular laptop. And that's, if you think about it, that's what the for loop does, right? So this is a more concise way of doing it. We will use this. I can just comment out this part because we don't really need it. And I am in fact done. Now, what happens if my user has a more complex query? Let's say the user has chosen to do brand as well as a speed. Well, in fact, we are already covered for this. Let's look at one more example. Let's say I say WDell. Let's say, well, none, let's say none. But I do want to have a RAM of, let's say, 4 GB, right? So I'll just put 2 criteria here so that we find something. Hopefully, if I look at, let's say, len of, say, selected len of say selected laptops. That's one, because looks like one laptop did meet the criteria. And if I look at the selected, that happens to be a laptop which is brand is WDell, and indeed RAM is 4 GB. So, no other laptop met this. And how do I know no other laptop met this? Because, well, if I look at the query, that is laptop brand is equal to Dell and laptop RAM is equal to 4 GB. Presumably, this is the only laptop that met the criteria. And this list comprehension selected that laptop for me. So I hope the logic here is becoming clear. Now, as you can imagine, right now our queries are very simple, but the query could have been, let's say, for example, let's say I was okay with Dell, say WDell or WHP or WASUS. I could have said laptop brand is equal to WDell, or the laptop brand is equal to WHP, or laptop brand is equal to say ASUS. Any of those is fine. So the richness of the query, the richness of the, let's say, the user preference can be captured in the query, but thereafter the same logic can be used. What it also tells us is that if the user selects something that is absolutely not available in the store at all, which means that none of the laptops have any of this, that could also happen perhaps because user meant to put WDell, but perhaps by mistake put let's say Dello, or perhaps instead of none, I put something else. If any of those mistakes happen, our list will end up empty. Because when this query runs, it will not find that spec. So again, that can be improved by making a graphical interface. But get the idea. Very, very interesting, quite realistic also in some sense. I hope this has been interesting for you. If learning programming this way is fun, look at our website, because we run Python programming through such fun activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.